So this is number 4, and see, I do own something more than black shirts or blue shirts. Here's a red shirt. How about this? Uh, Red might be the color for the day, too. You never know. Really, what I want to do in this session is just show you the clips that Richard had. Sometimes it looks like they're not continuous, and that's because I did some speaking in between, but I really want you to get the gist of what Richard has said. What I should say is I want you to get the depth of what Richard said. And if you have questions, you could email me at ray at notepadanswers.com or ray at rayciervo.com. Either one of those will work, and I'll answer them as best I can. But Richard really is a wealth of information, and that's why I've recorded these and made them a little bit more approachable in size. Okay, so hope you listen on. And
It's
they
funny.
want to.
Gregory Boyd, in his book God of the Possible,
Mhm.
he does a Q&A at the end of his book, to kind of flesh out potential objections to his view. And someone brings up the idea of, well, what about figures of speech? What about figurative language about God? And let me, if you allow, let me tell you what he says from his book. He said there's certainly passages in the Bible that are figurative and portray God in human terms. So you go, okay, so how would we know them? And here's what he says: you can recognize them because what is said about God is either ridiculous if taken literally, or because the genre of the passage is poetic. Well, okay, so ridiculosity then becomes my criterion, according, or at least one criteria that he says. But then I would just go, well, to a classical theist, it sounds ridiculous to me to think that God doesn't know the future actions of free creatures. In fact, I would submit to you that sounded ridiculous to all the systematic theologians that
Mhm.
you could access. I mean, that's what I do in my God Fading Away. Look at what these guys say and look at their list of these attributes of God. They all would take the idea that God can't know what a free creature is going to do in the future. They would take that as ridiculous. So now ridiculosity just becomes so useless because what you consider to be plausible or not, or ridiculous or not, can very often just be an effect of a previous philosophical commitment that you've either consciously or unconsciously made. And so we're right back to where we're going. Now we got to argue the metaphysics again that you thought
Right.
we were all free from, but it turns out we're actually not free from after all. Well, that
Uh,
reminds me, when we think about things, another kind of hook that I do to get people to at least pause long enough to consider that there might be some legitimate role that philosophy needs to play in the conversation. As I said, okay, so let's say we believe in the inerrancy of the Bible, as most, or at least many evangelicals still hold. But you can't believe the Bible is inerrant if you don't know what an error is. You can't say the Bible doesn't have errors if you don't know what an error is. But I would submit you can't know what an error is if you don't know what truth
Truth
is.
is, yeah.
But what truth is a philosophical question.
Hmm.
It just is. Again, we didn't maybe need to lobby too hard for that because nobody didn't know what that meant. If you said, I believe the Bible is true, you might find people that say, well, I don't believe that the Bible is true, but everybody knew what everybody meant. Today, well, I believe Christianity is true. That may just mean, I think asparagus tastes good. And I'm happy you like asparagus. I prefer Brussels sprouts, as if that's true for you, not for me, kind of thing. Well, no, that's
Right.
not what I meant. And now it's even worse. It's morphed. I think you're exactly right. It's a good way to put it. It's sort of the novelty wore off of some of the early versions of postmodernism. Now it's really infected and morphed into this critical theory, to where now even the idea of the laws of logic and the role of evidence and argument are now considered racist if you employ those in any kind of social discourse. That's just Western and racist and white or whatever, however they're going to characterize it. And
Yeah.
you go, wow, uh, 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 we can't just rest on the fact that our fellow members of our culture or our country or Western civilization or anything else. We can't rest on the fact that, well, everybody kind of knows where the boundaries are and what the categories are. No, the very foundation itself is being chipped away And the only way to sustain an argument, if we're going to sustain an argument, is to lobby for some of these foundational things we didn't used to have to lobby for. I think that's why philosophy is now seeing, in principle, a sort of comeback in some circles in apologetics, because people are realizing, yeah, I guess we can't avoid the philosophical questions anymore. And
No.
thank God there have been a lot of great apologists that God has raised up who are philosophically trained, like a Bill Craig or Paul Copan or Doug Geivett or others we could name, and of course Norm Geisler prior to that, and others. And then as a subset of that, we go, okay, fine, we got everybody sold on the project. Now let's see if we can shore it up and make it as strong as we can. And that's why we argue for this classical tradition, I call it, because that sounds fairly innocuous, doesn't it? Oh yeah, I'm a classical philosopher. Okay, well that's nice.
That sounds good.
Or if you want to sound more partisan, you can say the Aristotelian Thomistic tradition, or Thomistic, or Scholastic. There's a lot of different words, or moderate
Right,
realism,
right,
as it
yeah.
was called in earlier literature. Exactly. So there's a lot of different terms to use to make this lobby for this classical realism that we think that's the philosophy it has to be.
Yeah.
Philosophy's fine, but unless it's really good philosophy, it's not really going to deliver. Unless it's the right vaccine, you're not going to be protected from COVID-19, right? It's not just
I,
anything you can inject. It's got
I've
to
got
be
a
the right. So we think this classical method is the vaccine against these intellectual toxins that are surrounding us.
Listening to Richard, you just see how important philosophy is, and understanding some of the really basic things about philosophy help your interpretation of Scripture and certainly your theology. It's very important. And I'm glad you could see this. And just remember, if you can help us out, give us a like, comment, subscribe, and ring the bell. Okay, till the next time.